Dear all, I'm Kage of Ethos Books. Thank you. It is exciting to see the many faces before me. There are still more coming in. Friday traffic. Thanks for also coming without maybe too much dinner. Yeah. And I also imagine the many who are watching the live stream and who will come to watch the YouTube video. We are connected by today's occasion. This public forum is co-organized by the good people of Academia SG and Ethos Books. Academia SG is a volunteer collective committed to promoting critical public-facing scholarship on Singapore, which is wonderful because we know that Singapore metrics sometimes don't count. So they are doing some things that are also very worthy. For Ethos Books, we are an independent publisher working out of Singapore, invested in publications to further collective imagination and conscience. It has been a pleasure for the Ethos Books team to be working with Academia SG. Today's public forum is titled States of Unease, From Critique to Collective Imagination. One of the aims for tonight is to cross-pollinate research and imagination. Our work becomes better when these come together. There's so much anticipation for this forum. How do we know? Within 3 days, all 500 tickets sold out. Yeah. We started a wait list, which is still growing today. I think today there are still people who are putting themselves on the wait list. Even when we did a call for student volunteers, it was answered swiftly, and there's also a wait list. Yeah. So, wow. What is it about a public forum that excites us? The meaning of public. I think it is related to the common good. And I think all the moderators and speakers, why you are invited, why you're here is because you care for this as well. Public and the common good. And the audience as well. I think you care for this deeply. We exist together as a public, and a forum is a coming together and invite for us to share ideas and become changed. I think what we are excited about is the possibility of coming together to do good things. And today, it is to contemplate multiple conceptions of living well, or at least living better. Yeah. You know we are working the speakers and moderators hard when their seats are not half as comfortable as the audience's seats. Yeah, and also all of them waive their honoraria, so we can use to do the live stream and to provide free seats for student volunteers. So thank you, speakers and moderators. Yeah. Thank you to the student volunteers. You were so enthusiastic. I feel that's also a good sign of things to come because you will be the future academics, activists, and artists. And thank you to Ren Chun, your ongoing support for Ethos via the Ethos Nights initiative. You sponsored tonight's drinks. If there are leftover drinks, right, they will be out there waiting for you. Bring them home. Maybe just leave the next bottle for the other guests. But if you bring home a bottle of wine, commit to hosting a discussion in your time and space. Your commitment, okay? And further the conversations tonight. And a good time now for a quote and a note. The quote is one connected to food and drink. Life will eat us up unless we set our sights higher. So that's what we are doing today. And second, a note. My jacket is making only its second appearance. Some of you will know which was the first. And every time I wear it, it will be for as scintillating an audience as it is today, as it was for the last time. So I'm looking forward to the next occasion. So the next part will be really just to tell you what you can have tonight ahead of you. 3 parts. Part 1 will be moderated by Anthea Ong. Panel 2 will be moderated by Kok Heng Luan. And the audience dialogue by Teo You Yenn. Panel 1 and 2 will be live streamed, while the recording of the audience dialogue will be released early next week. And finally, a friend of Ethos told me she was delighted for Ethos having the gumption to organize this event. It is easy when we have allies, or sorry, not easy, it is easier. It's easier when we have allies like Academia SG, when we have professional experts, the moderators and speakers, that's what you are to us, and when we have support from audience with gumption like you. So thank you very much. The public forum is now in the good hands of our moderators. May I invite Antia and panel 1 speakers to the stage now. Yeah, please join me in welcoming them.
Good evening. How are you? Yay! Excellent. Okay, it's wonderful. Truly sitting here, it is a full house. Some empty seats here and there, and also knowing that there's a waiting list, which I guess the waiting list caused some unease for some people, maybe. But I was just sharing with them, some of them that there could be some seats here that we could actually open up on the floor. So I'm very privileged to be asked to moderate this first panel. I recall that the last time I was privileged enough to be invited by Ethos was actually back in 2020, just after the GE 2020 election. And it was for a forum, then of course in the thick of COVID, it was a virtual one. It was called The Ground Speaks. And 6 years later, we're here to talk about states of unease. And I'm just wondering what that says about Singapore. Or maybe Ethos. So if you don't mind, could we just take a moment to take 3 deep breaths so that we are starting off this forum with ease? A little bit of ease. Just do it on your own. I'm not going to guide, even though I do that often, but I won't guide. But just take 3 deep breaths, if you will. You can close your eyes, you can open your eyes, but just feel the 3 breaths. And welcome again, right here with the presence of all of you, all of your body, all of your mind. I know that we will not need to go into the detailed biographies of our esteemed panelists, but what got me really keen to get started was to try to get them, and they all agreed very gamely, okay, maybe not so much Gok Ho, to actually, instead of course, we're not reading their biographies, but we would like to hear from them, who are you in 7 words or less? Right, so they did have a little bit of preparation, but let's just hear from them. I'll start with mine, which I've actually sort of bent it around a little bit. It's full-time human. I cheat a bit. Full-time is 1 word. Full-time human being and part-time everything else. Correct, Nana? Very good. Okay, Gok Ho, over to you.
Can I go? Yeah. I said I'll do that if everybody else agreed, and then she messaged back a minute later, so that later to say everybody agreed. So
I don't think he really believed me, but
so I was outvoted. So mine are doing what we can while we can.
Yay!
For mine is building talk. I have learned to listen.
Yeah, I love that.
Mine is not profound at all. Okay, it's just a list of all the different things I do. So I'm a doctor, researcher, educator, a Christian, a brother, a husband, and an activist.
Wow.
Mine is related to my research. My name is Nien, and I cannot be contained by one story.
Whoa. Yeah, this is so powerful. I actually got inspired by Malcolm Gladwell, who actually did a challenge across the world for us to try to explain who we are in 7 words or less. And I find this to be really helpful in gently collapsing the emotional distance between the speakers and the audience, so that it's not just who we are in our professional capacity that's here with you, especially in a public forum like this, but also as human beings, as fellow human beings. So on that note, let's get started. Each panelist would share for about 5 minutes, and then after their individual sharing, we would have a conversation, and then, we will open up to the floor, maybe? No, only after that. Yeah, after the 2 panels, sorry. Yeah, please, would you like this card?
Thank you, Est. Right, switch gears, serious stuff. Like all social policy researchers, I started my career studying how social policies care for people through housing, pensions, and other forms of welfare. I analyzed how well policies worked and suggested improvements where I found gaps. But over time, I came to realize that social policies do not just provide care, they can also be a source of harm. And I do not mean harm that happens because we missed a problem or don't know how best to fix it. I mean harm as we intend it, harm as policy design, as policy decision. Since then, I've spent a lot of time trying to understand the logic and consequences of such policies, how, why, and who they harm. I'll talk about 2 examples today. First, public rental housing. Our stock of HDB rental flats reserved for poorer people are old, small, and too few. Tenants who are single have to share a 1-room flat with another person, typically a stranger. Applicants face a long wait, eligibility is strict, and tenures are short. The poor accessibility and quality of rental housing contribute to homelessness. It took me a while to realize that this is a service they provide, but don't want you to use. More precisely, it's a service they don't want you to want to use. Yes, rental flats provide basic shelter, but they are also a deterrent. In our home-owning society, rental housing policy is designed to dissuade people from renting and spur tenants towards buying their own flats. In other words, the poor state of rental housing is not an oversight. Singapore is very good at housing. 80% of households live happily in HDB flats. We will have no problems providing rental flats of good quality if the goal was to meet everyone's housing needs, including the poorest in our society. But we choose not to. It's a policy decision. I've learned a lot about our migrant labor policies since I started volunteering with Ho 2 years ago. Migrant domestic workers are paid about 1/10 of Singaporeans' median salary and have no right to change employer. There are no legal limits on work hours, and abuse and food deprivation happen far too often. While domestic work is an important livelihood for these workers, and many of them have kind, caring employers, does not change the fact that our policies leave domestic workers vulnerable. We prioritize employers' interests instead by keeping costs to a minimum and giving them as much control as possible. As a nation that is proudly pro-worker, we know what employment rights are. We know how to protect migrant workers if we wanted to. Again, this is a policy decision. So what is a harm? In both cases, basic needs are not assured. For tenants, these are needs for space, privacy, and peace of mind. For domestic workers, it is their needs for job security, fair wages, safety, nutrition, and rest. In both cases, rights for decent housing and decent work have been traded off for other objectives, whether to promote home ownership or to extract care labor at the lowest possible cost. In both cases, policies select a group, a vulnerable group with the least resources and therefore the least choice, and confront them with conditions that the rest of society will never accept. Whenever we trade off basic needs and rights, there is a cost to all of us. Our rental housing policy teaches everyone that the only way to secure adequate housing is to buy a flat. This creates a lot of anxiety over housing affordability and a lot of pressure for policymakers. When we mark down the price of domestic work, we create a dependence on it that hampers the development of a self-sufficient care infrastructure. We are now a society that will struggle to care for ourselves without migrant workers. And when we devalue migrant care labor, we cheapen all care labor. This is partly why the care work done by family members is so invisible, so taken for granted, and gets so little state support. And there are wider consequences. A two-tier society where social policy cares for some and harms others promotes the attitude that people do not have equal worth, where the notion of community, of we, is so selective, it is entity. What can we do? The repair work will require recognizing and rejecting policies that harm and abandoning the strategy of division and discrimination. A good life must begin by respecting our common humanity and rebuilding our social policies based on principles of equality and solidarity. We can talk more during the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Gong-ho. So Gong-ho has invited us to think about how policies can be caring and harmful at the same time, but I think also that are we reducing care to eligibility criteria, right? Thank you for that. Kamshwa.
Thank you. Thank you. Two caveats. The view I share today are of my own and not of the organization I work for. And I'll put in more provocative than I otherwise might, in the hope to draw out responses later. And if something sounds sharp, please take it as an invitation to push back. So let me start with an instruction that I usually give my students. Do not look at architecture, see it. So we pass through our cities every day, we look at it constantly, but we rarely see it. We rarely see what time, use, care, neglect, and memories have left behind. My work is to teach that kind of seeing. So let me show you what I mean. Take any old walls in this city. The line cluster tell you what was available and affordable when it was built. A change in the brick costing halfway tells you that book stop and start again. And because perhaps money ran out or someone have changed their mind. A patch of new renders perhaps was removed and never replaced. Layers of paint record the occupant's idea of respectability and aesthetic taste. None of these are written down anywhere. The wall is our only document. I'm trained as an architect and I work as an architectural historian, and what I do is conservation. In practice, this means borrowing in darkened archives room, consulting books in libraries, directing conservation work on site, and more recently, analyzing materials in laboratories. All this sound eclectic, but it is one pursuit, trying to understand what we have inherited before we decide what to change. Tonight, I want to suggest that this unease that this forum is asking about is not only social, it's written into the fabric of our city. You read it in our walls. So Singapore managed unease in the city by making things efficient, clean, renew, and future-ready. That's our ideal narrative. It's a genuine achievement. We are being admired for it, and righteously so. Delegations come to Singapore to study our planning, the garden city, the parks, the greenery that threads through a dense island, our HDB estates that house the overwhelming majority of us. This achievement is real, and I have benefited from it like everyone else in the room. But here's the gap that this panel asks about. We ask ourselves, we are a society that honors its heritage. In practice, we honor a curated, photogenic version of it, the gazetted monuments and restored shophouses, and we clear much of the rest. And when we clear it, we do not only remove buildings. So look at the image on the screen up there. Right? So we remove communities and the attachments that live in them. Marine Parade Community Club, Dakota Crescent, and Yishun Ham, the cinema some of you had grew up with, the neighborhood that quietly disappear between one visit and the next. And often we remove them early. The Singapore Heritage Society put it well in its 2018 position paper and exhibition on our modernist icon that was called Too Young to Die. I had left the exco back then although the argument was taking shape when I was still on the exco. The buildings cleared before anyone had decided whether they matter, while still in their first working life. The phrase "too young to die" had a particular unfairness of it. Not that this building grew old, but they were never allowed to. The photograph above is of Darren So, the architectural photographer. It belongs together with his book, Before It All Goes, his record of buildings in the last month, to which I contributed essays on our lost repools. I've come to think that a photograph is not a substitute for a building. It is what we are left with once we have decided not to keep one. So on the contradiction that will name this, we are rhetorically pro-heritage in the same way that we are rhetorically pro-family. We say these things matter deeply, but the logistics or the logics that actually govern us work against ever keeping anything for long. Land value, efficiency, and the imperative to keep upgrading and conversation cuts both ways. The same hand that the author, the smooth national story also alter the national official heritage. Heritage too can be managed, brand, and made smooth. This is not abstract. As we sit here tonight, two of these cases, Gilman Barracks, Maju Forest, are open for public feedback until 6th of August. These are separate consultations to mention on. On Maju, you read the environmental impact assessment. For Gilman, its own environmental and heritage studies. I should be honest in this, right? It's part of my work. In my profession, I'm part of this apparatus. The conservation I practice is one way architecture get cleaned up, as much as I try to keep the patina. Surface repaired, irregularities smoothed, and are awkward made presentable, guilty as charged. So when I argue for friction, I'm arguing against a reflex in my own profession and in myself. Thank you.
Thank you. Teacher's Squad. Wow. And this hits home. This is actually just like, 200 meters from where I live. Right? Oh my goodness, because we realized that we are neighbors. You should actually show what they are doing now in its place. So you are suggesting buildings and places can also care or fail to care for memory, attachment, and community. And also what I hear is that not reducing heritage to just preserving buildings. Thank you. Thank you. Paul, over to you, please.
Thank you very much. So I have exactly the same caveats that he has, in that I'm speaking entirely in my own capacity and not representing anyone. And secondly, I think I'd like to be a little bit provocative. And this thought or this theme came to me when someone who I respect a great deal said to me, we're an aging society and that's us. And then I thought about it, and actually that's not true. Because in reality, that we don't have 140-year-olds or 150-year-olds wandering around the streets of Singapore or anywhere in the world. What has actually happened is that fewer poor people are dying. And to some people, that's a great crisis, because I'm actually privileged. I'm not that privileged that I can sell a house for $88 million to a mysterious stranger. But last week would have marked the 146th birth anniversary of my great-grandfather. So he died in 1972, that's 54 years ago, at the age of 92. So everyone on that side of the family lived over 80. And they were relatively comfortable. My great-grandfather was actually in the court in Kedah, where Tunku Abdul Rahman's family were very prominent. So he had good genes, and he had access to reasonable health care. Now, my father's side of the family is another story, because only two of them lived beyond 75. So there is a genetic component to health. And that is not going to change. Although, again, that's too much to go into. But in reality, for most of history, the poor live nasty, short, and brutish lives because they were vulnerable. They were vulnerable to bad air, bad water, childhood diseases. But what's happening now is through great improvements in public health, people are surviving. People are surviving the childhood period. People are surviving, they don't get heart attacks. We wear seat belts. We don't die in traffic accidents when we're like 30 years old. Although now the motorcyclists are obviously much more vulnerable than ever before. So this narrative that's coming out that we are an aging society, I think actually is a guise for those who've always had power to try and avoid the responsibility of looking after the rest of society. See, because in the past it was easy, the poor would just die off. Now you've got to deal with them because they're there in your face. So you do all kinds of things. You cut social security, you privatize the NHS, you introduce means testing and all kinds of things to try and limit high quality healthcare to those who can afford it. So that's the provocative part of it. Now the positive side of it though is I think something can be done. And I mentioned earlier in my list of 7, some of you may or may not have noticed I didn't include politician. And it's because I'm actually an activist. And I got into politics mainly because, Goh Chok Tong says you have to get into politics if you want to try and change policy. He told Catherine Lim that. But in reality, I think, a lot of people say, I just met a good friend who said, there's no point in trying and change society in Singapore. It's just a dead loss. We have to wait for some major political earthquake to happen. But in reality, a lot of us don't remember that in 2011, MediShield Life, which is the mandatory government health insurance policy, did not cover diabetes and did not cover cancer. So if you had diabetes or cancer, you are not covered by the government's mandatory health insurance policy. What happened was that we in the SDP introduced the healthcare plan. The Workers' Party, One Al-Junid, the GRC, and Obamacare came into place. So now MediShield Life does cover diabetes, and it does cover cancer. So I think there is the possibility of evoking change. And it doesn't necessarily have to be through electoral politics, because I know 95% of y'all are not going to get involved in electoral politics. If any of you read the Department of Statistics General Household Survey report that came out recently, the headline news was all about total fertility rate, about 1 in 7 households having more than $30,000 median income. But if you look at the report, the figure that stood out to me was the fact that the number of people with 1 or more disabilities actually declined from 2020 to 2025. So it actually declined by 0.2%. And what was really interesting, so even though we had an aging population, we had more older people, we had fewer disabled people. But what was really striking to me was that this decline was not across the board. The decline was highest in the poorest, in those in the 1 and 2 room flats, had a decline from 6% to 4%. So what I think that means is that all these measures that they put in, the AICs, all these means-tested benefits, they actually work. They actually prevent people from getting disabled. What we need to do is just make them available to more people. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. I think you're simply inviting us to ask who deserves healthcare, and also that we don't reduce healthcare discussion to just longevity. Thank you for that. And last but not least,
Thank you so much, Anthea. I also have the same caveat. These thoughts are my own. And there's been a lot of mention so far about narrative. And my research has shown that over the last decade or so, there has actually been a remarkable flourishing of Singaporean life storytelling. The narratives of ordinary Singaporeans or people in Singapore have proliferated, especially in digital and social media, produced and curated through a concerted and collaborative process between state and society. This is not a phenomenon unique to Singapore. You may recognize these storytelling techniques in projects and media companies like Humans of New York, StoryCorps, or Great Big Story. These new Singapore stories are often bite-sized. They come in clusters or series, and they show a different, more intimate and emotional side of Singapore. They appear in memory projects, short film competitions, social media, mainstream media, and national movements and campaigns. Many of them go viral. I think we have all seen and been moved by stories like that on Instagram, or for those of us who are a little bit older, Facebook, myself included. In my book, I argue that taken together, these narratives are meant to undo the less desirable effects of decades of pragmatism, to engender a more caring, a more passionate and positive and creative citizenry. Ironically, pragmatism is not an emotionally neutral doctrine. As Yo Yenn's book, Unease, has clearly documented, it has been driven primarily by negative emotions, or what CNI calls the ugly feelings that drive late modernity: anxiety, paranoia, envy. In other words, kiasunas. So I need to get engaged quickly so I can get my BTO. My child has no time to play. Foreigners are stealing my job, and now AI is stealing my job, etc. The people featured in these narratives override this culture. They form a collage of a Singapore that embraces multiple conceptions of a good life. Interestingly, the stories disproportionately feature Singaporeans who lead passionate and often unpragmatic lives. They are artisans, volunteers, entrepreneurs, caregivers, chefs, designers, athletes, game developers, and so on. A dynamic and diverse group testifying against the image of Singaporeans as a transactional population lacking care, creativity, and imagination. Self-sacrificial labor, love for learning, and social and creative projects are emphasized as joyful pursuits that promise happiness. If parts of their lives are uneasy, they persevere. I am not questioning the authenticity of these individuals and their stories. As a Singaporean, I cannot help but be moved and be inspired by them, be proud of what they have achieved. But on a larger scale, such storytelling can also be detrimental. For one, short, decontextualized accounts that showcase complete arcs of redemption with happy endings can foreclose the discussion of social issues on a systemic level, the meso and macro that Yo Yenn writes about in her book. Simply put, happy endings can create the impression that these issues have already been resolved. Success stories of passionate, unpragmatic Singaporeans, for example, generally have the lesson that if you do what you love, the money will follow, glossing over the struggles of going against the grain of societal expectations, or worse, implying that those who failed to gain recognition were simply not passionate or resilient enough. Stories about Paralympians who win gold, single mothers who volunteer while juggling 3 jobs, and domestic workers who run marathons in their spare time, they cast a shadow on real-life situations that cannot be encapsulated in such narrative arcs or produced by professional digital agencies. By implication, there is no excuse for not achieving one's dreams and living the so-called good life if they can do it. Moreover, an important prerequisite of being heard is being a good storyteller, which is a skill not afforded by everyone. We should not stop telling stories, but we must also do the reflexive work of revealing imbalances and contradictions that arise. We need to be more accepting of alternative narrative arcs and unhappy endings that spur us towards action rather than passive acceptance of the status quo. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you, Min. What came up was that your work asked another question, that even we build better systems, that we should ask what stories help us become the kind of people we want to be. And what came out clearly was don't reduce society to economic performance or certain markers of success that very often is very meritocracy based. And that came out. Thank you all for your sharing. Let's have a conversation about, listening to all 4 of you, maybe I'll start with this. You were describing different forms of, and different states of unease. I like that word, by the way, Yu Yenn. I know you did say don't feel obliged to use the word, unease. Can I ask you to share what is the contradiction that you find yourself returning to over and over again? In the work that you do, or in the world that you imagine as well as possible. In other words, as you think about the gap between ideals and and the unease, right, and the reality. Yeah, what contradiction do you keep returning to? Who would like to start first? I don't think we need to go in this order, like Waila. Let's, yeah, sure, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, I think the unease comes from the tension between what you know you should do, what you think you should do, and what you can do. And this is in many different fields. Obviously, you want to be able to do everything for everyone. I mean, or at least some of us do. But the reality is that we can't. And most of us have a sort of an idea of why we want to do it or who we want to do it for. And it's based on a set of values. It's based on a set of values that we grew up with in our society, in our families. And I think the unease comes when we are unable to translate that into what we're doing. Societies change. There's no doubt about that. But I think the unease comes from the sense that they're changing in directions and in ways that we're not happy about, or that actually tend to violate the values that we have held dear for the longest time.
Anyone else want to chime in to that? To add on to what Paul shared?
Maybe I'll start.
Yeah.
So, in my work, I always say that the intangible is always nested within the tangible. Right? The tangible is the architecture that we save, we preserve, but by doing so, we are changing the intangible. Communities get displaced, I'm very conscious of that, and even if communities are not displaced, things are different. I mentioned earlier on, we clean up the walls. Patina is being wiped clean, right? And how much patina we're allowed to keep? Can we restore building while them looking old? Different people have different expectations, and that's always a tension that I have in my work.
Thank you for sharing that, because it reminds me also of this favorite word of ours in our society, which is trade-off. And Kansuan, you brought up the whole thing with Maju Forest, Gilman area. And I couldn't help but notice that the foregrounded narrative, going to Nien's work about storytelling, that the foreground, when we clear forests, seems to always be led by public housing, right? When actually it's not true, because when you clear a big piece of land, it's not just public housing that's actually being built. So talking about the tension that you mentioned, how do we deal with this pushback or this justification about trade-off that comes our way when we are trying to describe the different states and different places of unease, or the gaps between ideals and reality? Go home. Do you have some thoughts to that? It just came out for me because I think that trade-off is used often in official and even...
I think often when we hear the argument about trade-offs, it's not used authentically, as in that we're not really assessing the trade-off properly. It's used to stop conversation rather than to encourage thinking. I mean, the unease for people who study social policies, we call it social welfare, and yet so many policies clearly hurt people, right? So the unease comes from questions like, why do policies that need to happen not happen? And why do obviously hurtful policies that ought to stop, why do they not stop, right? So, and the answers, once we dig deep enough, so when I first started on this, people would say, maybe they don't know, maybe you should tell them there's a problem. So I stopped raising the alarm would help. Then I heard language like, you cannot make it too easy for those people. Yeah, so then I realized, there are these people, there are we, and then there are those people. And I heard language like, you must create some friction in the system, right? Otherwise, people will take advantage of it. Then I realized they know. So the objective is something other than social welfare, right? So if you dig deeper, it's about political voice, right? People who don't count can be ignored, right? It's about political voice. It's also about ideology. It's about our view of human nature. how concerned you are that people will take advantage of society over the fact that there might be some hardship. So that's what I mean by how the notion of trade-off is not used authentically. I mean, the crudest trade-off I can think of is something we've been talking about. We say there's a trade-off between increasing business costs and the loss of lives of migrant workers who ride on the back of lorries to and from work every day. They say, oh, that's a terrible trade-off. You know, on the one hand, people are dying, but on the other hand, business costs. Really? That's a trade-off? Are we really having a conversation about that, right? So it's not used authentically. Underlying that statement is an ideological decision that has already been made, right? We often use trade-offs when we don't really want to have a discussion anymore.
Yeah, I mean, the example, thank you for shedding light on that. I think that example that you just raised, we had a long discussion, and sometimes it's a constructed binary, you know, and what happens if you bring the employers and the employees on the same side, right? And say that actually as an employer, I want my workers to be not at the back of a lorry, right? Then I think that changes the whole narrative, but if it continues to be this binarized construct, I do agree with you then the trade-off is a construct that's based on a certain premise that may have already been decided. So as we talked about, you know, the contradictions and we talked about the trade-off, the tensions we feel, what conditions get in the way of a good life? I mean, you mentioned, I think all of you mentioned some of it. Maybe the other way to look at it is, what do we keep mistaking for progress? And Yenn mentioned a little bit of it in the storytelling aspect of it, and Kang Sua, you did too. Yeah, what conditions get in the way of a good life, and what do we keep mistaking for progress as a society, as a people? And that may have changed over the course of time, obviously. We're not talking about, you know, but right now, maybe, what do we keep mistaking as progress?
I think maybe to bridge this question with the previous one, I think the proliferation of these stories when, you know, marginalized voices seem more better heard than ever before, like you see stories of homeless people all the time, like on Our Grandfather Stories, the Instagram page, for example. There was just a story of a homeless young man published last week who was driven homeless when he was 13. And you see the presence of these stories and you think, hey, you know, progress is being made, voices are being heard. But actually, the proliferation of these stories, this is the inherent contradiction that I always come back to, is actually for very pragmatic purposes. It is to promote individual responsibility, social cohesion, improve Singapore's public image, for tourism, for investment, for entrepreneurship. Is to promote among us stayers and not quitters also in a cultural sense, right? So these are, I think, the so-called KPIs of storytelling. But in a sense, you cannot have your cake and eat it too. This is the trade-off that you cannot actually make. Like they don't want this trade-off, right? You cannot. These stories inherently sometimes inadvertently reveal the flaws in the sacrosanct ideology of pragmatism that we live with, and hence show that we cannot be both. So we cannot say that we care about creativity or innovation and marginalized people and still value productivity and efficiency and the status quo, or, you know, above process. So yeah.
Yeah. You want to add? Thanks, Yenn. Yeah.
I mean, I think the thing that gets in the way of a good life, more than anything else in Singapore and in many institutions in many parts of the world, is the use of metrics. So you know, a good life is defined by your GDP per capita. You know, it used to be the 5 Cs. Now it's impossible for a young person to dream of owning a car or condominium. So it's gone down to 2.5 Cs. And but you know, these metrics which exist, and they permeate every strata of society. In academia, they are extremely onerous, and you find people just playing games with the metrics. I don't know how many of you know this, but up to a year or two ago, the department in NUS, which had overtaken Harvard, Cambridge, and Oxford, was art history. And the reason why the art history department is incredibly good, but they only have one full-time tenured faculty. They have adjuncts from the different museums who write incredible pieces, get published, get cited. So the numerator is very high, but the denominator is 1. So by the metrics level, they are the most successful. They're better than Harvard, Cambridge, and Oxford. So that is kind of I mean, that's an extreme example. I told the provost about that, and he said, okay, don't worry, I'm not going to cut the Department of Medicine down to 1. I said, I'm relieved.
Good one.
Yeah, but I think in many ways in our society, we are just governed by metrics, the size of the car, the number of rooms you have, and it just distorts everything.
Thank you. Did you guys want to add in, François?
Well, I have the privilege of reading everyone's abstract and then having privileges here listening to my co-speakers, right? One thing that strikes me is that the four of us are talking about, in our respective discipline, how things get sorted, how things get ranked, and how things got smoothened, right? And perhaps that's another way of talking about trade-off in what Kok Ho mentioned. But in order to sort, to rank, to smooth, we need to know what are the matrix to sort them, and most of the time we do not know, right? And that's why Kok Ho was saying that a trade-off is something that you don't want to talk about, is the cut-off conversation. But in order to have meaningful conversation, we need to know exactly what we are sorting, exactly how do we smooth things out, and what do we want to keep. In my case, what do we want to keep, and what do we allow to die? And as in buildings are allowed to die, you demolish them, right? I'm not a building hugger, like a tree hugger, right? I do think that building can be allowed to die gracefully, right? If we all collectively agree that the building can die gracefully. The issue is that we don't even have this conversation. Should the building die, right? And in a way, I look at my profession as a profession of attention. We need to pay more attention and have more conversation about what we want to keep in our memories, because buildings are tangible markers of our memories.
Yeah, I remember just having a conversation 2 days ago with someone who asked, what do I think when we are asked to give constructive criticism? And apparently that means that you can focus on certain parts of a policy and offer solutions to it. But you can't question the premise behind that policy. I mean, it just got me to think about what you are describing, right? That we don't actually get involved as citizens and people on the first principle, on the design principle of or premise of a policy of why this is a certain way. And I think over time we all forget why, this whole lorry ban has stayed, for example. Yeah, no, that's a really good thing to think about, to mull over. I mean, I think we've been talking a bit of unease, and it sounds like it's almost always something to solve. This is a sort of a spontaneous question. Is there a kind of unease that we should actually learn to live with?
I think in unease, in terms of like being able to embrace messy stories, stories that don't conform into these neat arcs. Yeah. I think I think art and theatre is very, very good at that, at making, these familiar habits of telling stories, consuming stories very strange. So, like when I watched Tan Bin Bin's In Time to Come, I was very uneasy, but that's because she just refused to tell a story. She just refused to give you the spectacle. And I think that's something that we need to embrace a little bit more, yeah.
Nice. Anyone else? Any sort of unease that we should learn?
Add on, right? Hypothetically, if I live in a HDB flat that is architecturally significant, and the government says that let's do en bloc redevelopment, then I'll ask myself, should I be happy or should I be sad, right? I think it's okay to feel both, right? Because I'm happy because of maybe my run-off, like a spoiling concrete, leaking pipes and things that finally I get rid of it. I move a spanking new environment. I should be happy about that. But as a conservation expert or someone who loves old buildings. I feel sad that my building get destroyed, right? But the question is that do I want a better life for myself in terms of material comfort, or do you think that I will want to live with some inconveniences for the sake of heritage? So it is a real struggle. It's a real.
Actually, that reminds me of the conversation that I had before we started with Heng Lun about inconveniences and how Pulau Ubin is a great sandbox for us to test out. How do we get ourselves back to certain inconveniences that we have become so accustomed not to have to deal with? What then do you think is an assumption? And I say this because when we think about the policy premise and the ideology, as Kok Ho mentioned, behind, how we are organized as a society in a certain way, what is, an assumption that you want to change about what makes a good society? That has, I think we discussed some of it, but if we really distill it down to one assumption, what would you change?
Well, I think, there's always this idea that there's certain societies which are collectivistic and certain societies which are individualistic.
Yeah.
And we portray this idea that individualism is bad because, you're fighting for yourself and you're putting other people down. But in response to what Ning said, you see, to me, looking at something that is different, completely different, or something I would never have imagined, I think that's just so important, and it's integral to a good life for everybody, to be able to appreciate the differences. That's one of the things my mom always said. She said that everyone is different, and don't try and be somebody else. But appreciating that and recognizing that, look, you're different from me. I'm going to try and change you, and I'm going to fail. But I can either choose to ignore you, embrace you, but whatever it is, you're just there, and that's just part of being. And it's not just in Singapore. I think it's just everywhere.
I can add to that. I think as a performance scholar, I study emotions, and I think one key assumption that I really, would like to disobey is that emotions such as anger, ugly emotions, is the equivalent of the killing of joy, or positivity. So if you express anger, bitterness, frustration, you are essentially a killjoy. That you don't care about society, that you're not compassionate. And I think this is what you wrote about in the book, We Are Not the Enemy, right? In Kok Ho Yes. So I think that is a key assumption that that is not great for society. Yeah, anger is important. Yeah.
Anger is important. That's going to be a great meme to have out of this panel. What about Kok Ho? What comes up for you?
Well, speaking of emotions, I think one of the barriers to a good life is probably the notion that we need to be afraid. I don't think societies that grow up on fear can be truly happy. I'm not saying this is a safe world, it clearly isn't, right? But there are countries in kind of more precarious situations than us, and they are still happy. Look at Taiwan. They have proper reasons to fear, right? But they are making art. They're making music that we love and consume. They're writing books, enjoy their food. They enjoy pretty things, check out their cafes, right? They have reason to be afraid, but they're living life like it still can be enjoyed, right? Whereas we keep finding things to be afraid of. Just chatting with Kage, we fear everything, from aging to the rise of dementia, to losing competitiveness, to AI. We need to be afraid of everything, right? So the problem with fear is that it makes you want to seek refuge, sometimes in unwise places. So that, I think, is a key barrier. If we can just move away from that particular emotion. Anger is fine, but maybe not fear. If we can move away from fear, Then maybe we
Anger
can
is
think,
fine, but maybe not fear.
we can think more clearly, I think.
Thank you, thank you. I think that's interesting, right? Now that we are going into the sort of the realms of emotions and our collective psyche, you talk about fear. There's an assumption. I mean, we all know about the vulnerability narrative that that really is the fundamental premise of so much of the official narratives, the social narratives that we live with. Do we really feel so vulnerable? I mean, is there an objective, vulnerability and there's a subjective vulnerability? Since Gaho brought up the fear aspect of it.
I think vulnerability is very convenient for those who want to maintain the rest of us in a state of vulnerability, because then you turn to Big Brother, who's going to help you out. This is a big bad world. You need, the Godfather to protect you, and this relates to this whole idea of meritocracy. So meritocracy, was originally coined as a dystopian kind of society, where the people on top decide, what are the measures of merit. So there's this famous thing about, if you compare all the animals by their ability to climb a tree, then a fish will forever think he's deficient. So it's the same thing. It's the failure to recognize different talents, different abilities, different gifts, different contributions, and just very conveniently choosing the thing that you're good at and defining that as merit. So I think that's a big concern.
Thank you. I kind of agree more. I think one of the things I feel really passionately about is if we keep coming from a place of fear and not enoughness as a country, we're not standing on solid ground at all. We're not standing on strength. We're not standing on our advantages. And so then, as a collective psychology, we're constantly just going around in this vicious cycle of fear, of lack, of scarcity. And coming from that place really calls up different types of policy making and certainly different decisions about life at the individual and collective level if we're talking about a good life. I've been asked to wrap this up, so thank you very much. I think we are keeping to good time. I think thank you all panelists, it's been wonderful exchange, and thank you so much for your sharing with so much passion and conviction. What came up for me as a common thread is really care, but not in the sort of just a sentimental sense, but in a more civic sense of who belongs, who deserves, what deserves to be preserved, right? Who deserves healthcare, and which stories deserve telling. So what I'm taking away also from this conversation, and that's why, I kept sharing how Kok Hui is asking us not to reduce, our people to just eligibility categories, and all that. I think the greatest unease comes when we reduce people, places, or possibilities to a single value, or a single measure of value, right? A single indicator. And tonight, all our four speakers are reminding us to resist that temptation to reduce. To see more, to care more deeply, even with buildings, for sure, and to perhaps imagine more generously. And so we have spent the last 45 minutes naming different forms of unease, but also unease that we should also be comfortable with. What I think we need to now start having a conversation about is to imagine collectively, right, what's possible. And this is going to nicely move us to the next panel, moving from critique to collective imagination. But I have the honor of letting you all go for a bio break for 10 minutes. So right now it's 8:36. So please come back by 8:56 or 8:55. There are two, 8:46, sorry. Yeah, poor mathematics there. There are two floors. If you need to use the bathroom, there's one on this floor, and there's one also on the 8th floor. And what else did I have to do, Cassandra? Was that all? Yay. So again, see you back here, please. Thank you very much, panelists. Thank you.
Hello. Good evening. My name is Heng Luan. I'm a theatre practitioner. Thank you for coming, and I think it's humbling to be asked to moderate this session. Can I have the music off? Thank you. If not, we all will have to sway with it, while you listen to me. Yeah, that would be a state of unease for me. Okay. I think we had a really fruitful session. Many grounds are covered just now by Anthea and the four panelists. We're going to look at collective imagination. We have four speakers here. I'm going to just set up certain things before we go into each of the speakers. In the first place, I think what is, in You Yenn's book, State of Unease, I think, as I was reading through, I don't think the unease is about any kind of unease. But I think in the book, as she mentioned, it is a kind of a mode of living a profound unfreedom. So what is this unfreedom? And it is really about how the power of the states make us predictable, that we are managed into different systems. And because we are predictable, it is easier to manage, and easier to dictate, and easier to instill fear, as was mentioned just now previously. So in her book, in fact, You Yenn has said, I will bring my commitment to creating a space of unpredictability. So in a way, when we look at collective imagination and what we're going to talk about, is really entering into a space of unpredictability. And where mind, consciousness, and ideas meet, which means there will be messiness. There were things that we will disagree. There were things that we are not sure where it goes. And we have to navigate through this space of unpredictability. So today, all our four panelists here, afterwards you will get their bio up there because they are really very known people, so I don't have to introduce them. I'll let them each, in their own special field, talks about that space of unpredictability. And we talk about how we navigate through it. Okay? So, without further ado, I'm going to let Sharon to start. And Sharon, please.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And thanks to all of you for joining us for this, what I hope will be a very stimulating conversation this evening. Maybe just to cater to your demand of unpredictability, I too will start with a caveat that none of what I'm going to say represents my own views because I've learned from what I've read, I've learned from fellow scholars and activists in Singapore and so on. It's all borrowed. So I'm going to ask a very simple, small question. What is a good society? And taking off from the previous panel, I think all of us will agree that we can't look at it purely in material terms. And in fact, I want to argue that it is a fundamentally moral idea. And I want to say that Singapore lacks the spaces for those kinds of discussions because the national forums where such discussions should reside, media, universities, and of course Parliament, are constricted by a government that treats those conversations as impractical or even dangerous. So let me elaborate. The final 4 words of our national pledge say we will strive for progress for our nation. We've obviously achieved material progress, but our moral advance has been less impressive. But what do I mean by moral progress? At a societal level, I think of it as expanding society's sense of moral obligation to cover not just those whom we identify with, but also others whom we used to marginalize or overlook. To borrow Kokho's language from the first panel, it's about closing the gap between we and those people. Moral progress is about internalizing the golden rule, to treat others as if they could be us. At a time of genocide, it seems naive to think moral progress is even possible, but if we consider the longer sweep of history, it's clear that we have, as a human society, made significant strides that Singaporeans have benefited from. So, for example, when Singapore first got one man, one vote in 1955, this automatically also meant one woman, one vote, even though sharing democratic rights with the so-called weaker sex had been viewed as an extreme idea 50 to 100 years earlier. That's moral progress. Colonialism, slavery, children being put to work in mines and factories, sexual violence, these were once defended even by religious authorities. The world now considers them as immoral and criminal. Moral progress. So a good society would acknowledge such legacies and pay it forward. A critical mass of conscientious citizens would always be looking around them asking, who is still left out? Can we ease others' suffering? How do we give them equal dignity and the gift of inclusion in society? And today, there are Singaporeans who are trying to get us to confront such questions. They include advocates for the rights of migrant workers, people with disabilities, death row inmates, former political detainees, and victims of distant genocides. Now, some of these issues involve genuine ethical dilemmas. Others may require practical trade-offs. So I won't say that Singapore can be considered a good society only if we all, leaders and ordinary citizens, become instant converts to all these causes. But I will say this, a good society would at least allow and encourage open debates around such issues. Yet, in almost all the examples I've cited, advocates of these causes are treated as threats to stability. They are censored, harassed, and blacklisted by the state, as well as by establishment institutions such as the mass media. And unfortunately, many Singaporeans seem to buy the state's line that these activists are militant wokes, troublemakers to be shunned and suppressed. History should give us pause. All the examples of moral progress that we currently benefit from today, like the idea that Asians are capable of running their own countries, were yesterday's militant woke causes. A good society, in my view, would learn from history what might be called the law of future shame, that some attitudes and behaviors of every generation will one day be despised by their grandchildren. To minimize the risk of future shame, we should recognize that even good leaders and a decent public are fallible. We would be skeptical of orthodoxy. We would welcome dissent. I hope Singaporeans will want to be a good society, not just a feel-good society that is so self-satisfied and so self-congratulatory that it rejects the responsibility of achieving moral progress for our nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Many ideas over there. I want to thank you for giving a sense of history and legacy. I think that's extremely important because sometimes when we speak to the younger people, there's a sense of fatigue and tiredness with so many things that are happening. And that sort of gives a sense of a hope, like in what Rebecca's sonnet talk about, that hope in the darkness of our time. And at the same time, it also tells us it takes a certain process and a journey through a particular time. And you also articulate a very important condition of humility in that law of future shame, And of course, then I ask the question here, because you ask of the us to have that sense of humility, then I'm also thinking sometimes, where is the humility in the governed, in the people who govern? How can that happen? And of course, I have a question also. You articulate about the kind of fear that result from all this kind of organization. So there are two questions. How can we continue to organize? One. Two, how do we bring more people into the conversation in the atmosphere of fear? Okay, with that, we shall have Pooja, one of my favorite poets, okay?
No pressure. Thank you, everyone. As a poet, a teacher, and cultural worker, I spend a lot of time thinking about why it's necessary for a country to have a literary culture. The poet Patricia Smith says, "You look to the news for the news, and you look to poetry for the truth." I realize opening with the word truth while sitting beside three public intellectuals is a very provocative choice, but bear with me. I share that quote because I increasingly wonder if we are running out of places to look for the truth, not facts. We have more facts and more information than any society in history. The truth Smith points us towards is the kind of knowledge that helps us make sense of what it means to be human alongside other human beings, to discover that our lives are more intertwined than we first imagined. It asks for a willingness to stay with contradiction long enough for something more honest than certainty to emerge. We've all heard that literature cultivates habits of attention and interpretation. What we hear less often is that these are civic habits too. Before we can decide how to live together, we first have to learn how to understand one another. When I talk about a literary culture, I mean the social life that grows around language and ideas. It's about the kinds of human capacities a society chooses to cultivate and the kinds of public life those capacities make possible. It can live in classrooms, bars, dinner tables, WhatsApp groups, in the conversations that move between them. Think of it as an ecosystem in which people read, write, learn, think, argue, falter, and grow. A few Thursdays ago, I found myself at a spoken word night called Spoken Bird, run by Steph Dogfoot. At the very end of the evening, a young woman in a wheelchair came up to read. She shared that a few months earlier, she had tried to take her own life. While she was in hospital, a friend asked her to make a list of things she wanted to do when she got out, reasons to keep moving towards tomorrow. One of the things on her list was to read at this poetry night. I've spent over 20 years working in literary communities, long enough to become cynical, given how hard they are to sustain. You begin to wonder if all the endless labor is worth it, but every now and then, something like this reminds you it is. On the way home that night, I found myself thinking about the language we often use in arts leadership, strategic plans, KPIs, audience development, measurable outcomes. Sure, those conversations matter. Public institutions should be accountable. But they also reveal what we choose to value. Literary culture often struggles within that logic because its deepest effects resist measurement. You can count attendance, you can count books sold, but how do you measure the value of a place someone puts on a list of reasons to stay alive? Culture isn't something we can engineer into existence. It emerges through repeated acts of participation until people begin to feel that a place has meaning and belongs to them. Institutions can fund that process, protect it, or defund it, but they cannot manufacture belonging from top down, no matter how hard they try. And when we underinvest in literary communities, we can't be surprised years later when surveys tell us people aren't reading. Reading is only the most visible symptom. We are not simply measuring individual habits, but the consequences of a culture with fewer opportunities and spaces to question, interpret, be curious, and stay with difficult feelings together. The poet Muriel Rukeyser says, if we fear it in art, we fear it in nature. Art is one of the places where a society rehearses what it is willing to tolerate. If we become uncomfortable with voices that unsettle us in novels, poems, music, or theater, we have probably become uncomfortable with discomfort. and disagreement itself. When our cultural life only makes room for what is orderly, measurable, and agreeable, we can't be surprised if our public life gradually begins to do the same. When we measure the success of an arts event by attendance alone, we confuse reach with relevance. When we reward only the marketable or the politically comfortable, the work that asks the hardest and most challenging questions is the first to disappear. And when we replace organically formed spaces with carefully engineered ones, we mistake the appearance of culture for culture itself. Together, these decisions work to narrow the range of stories, questions, and ways of being a society learns to recognize. And when we narrow what we can imagine, we also narrow what we believe is possible. I return to the question I began with. Why does a healthy literary culture matter? Because it produces a society confident enough to hold many different ideas of what a good life might be for ourselves and for others, which is perhaps another way of saying that you look to the news for the news and you look to poetry for truth. Thank you.
Thank you, Pooja. I think in a way when she was saying it, it also sort of resonated just now with Kang Shua asking us to look at the buildings. And I was talking to Kang Shua about the immateriality of the material. How could we see beyond just words, but all the complex ideas and thoughts and emotion that goes with it? And there's a line from Pooja's poetry, The Rent, which resonates a lot with me when I was thinking about today. I mean, in the whole poem, there was this constant urge that she says, I want to hear a poem, give me a poem. And
I just want to say I wrote this poem when I was 22, so thank you for reading my juvenilia on stage.
So in this poem, there was this line that sort of hit me was, why are there no poems telling us to think, dream, dream, dream? And that's where art is most interesting because it allows us to imagine as individual as well as collective being. The idea of dream. I think there's a difference between daydreaming and night dreaming. Night dreaming, you're isolated. But when you daydream, a lot of time, you daydream with people. You daydream a possibility. Pooja, you're also an educator. And so I would love to hear the thing about teaching, about arts, especially when we talk about arts being part of that public space. And school is part of that public sphere. And how do you actually see your role in it as an educator, especially an arts educator? And also, the idea of how do you talk about the idea of imagination versus creativity? Because creativity has become a kind of performative indicator for success. Afterwards, I would like to hear the response. And now to Imran.
Thank you. I think there's one word that Singapore loves very much, and that word is harmony. We have racial harmony, we have religious harmony. In fact, this is the Racial Harmony Month. We have Presidential Council for Religious Harmony, we have Steering Committee. The word harmony is everywhere. And it's something that Singapore tends to pride itself with. We are a harmonious society, but always it's in comparison to the worst out there, right? With conflicts and strife in other countries. But of course, there's some truths in this, and it's important, I think, what I want to propose here is important to examine it in its own terms. How harmony is being experienced on the ground and across intersections, because our identities are very complex and layered. This may reveal the gaps between the ideals and realities, which is the thrust of You Yenn's book. And achieving harmony as a goal, of course, is indisputable, but what it looks like and how to strengthen it is where individuals and groups may differ. And this is where we have to look about vertical harmony and also the horizontal harmony. We don't really talk about political harmony, right? Can there be political harmony? We're not sure. Yeah, and how that looks like. We've seen this in several tensions that arose out of competing or contradictory visions of society. Of course, this is a normal state in every society. yeah? But my interest has always been about how we engage with such opposing ideas and the tension that comes along with it. So my work lies precisely in the intersection between the ideals and the realities. And I do this primarily by holding space for safe and brave conversations to occur. And I resonate a lot with You Yenn's concept of embeddedness of individuals within social structures, policies and institutions, and the narratives that emerge out of their lived experiences. Now in Singapore, we are all too familiar with neat and tidy categories that shapes policies, which in turn shapes our mental frameworks. Think of categories such as CMIO, or how we deal with religious representations, or how we frame several contentious issues. Now, I think we need to complexify this and challenge ourselves to go beyond a sterile, one-dimensional thinking or perspective. It requires us to not reduce our reality to simply numbers and statistics and neat categories, but to dialogue and engage at a deeper level to hear and draw lessons from ethnographic encounters. So I'm interested not just in talking about harmony, but to uncover, which means to think and see what disharmony, D-I-S, disharmony, looks like and how it feels at the personal and communal levels, particularly for those who are sitting at the margins of societies. And this refers to minority within minorities, the disempowered, those who are unheard of in mainstream spaces. Uncovering unease over harmony is not to discredit nor undo what is essentially an ideal or a goal, but it is to build the resilience. I don't really like the word resilience. I call it social muscles, by allowing, firstly, difference to sit with ease, second, acknowledging our blind spots, and thirdly, to transform privilege into solidarity. And this is tied to the very foundation of community building across intersections and identities through honest dialogues and deep listening that can uncover concerns far similar than what we will admit in our current polarizing environment. Now, I want to now talk a bit about disharmony, D-I-S, disharmony. How does it look like? Of course, conflicts, violence, hate crimes, etc. These are often downstream and often the total breakdown of harmony. But disharmony is when, number one, we are not capable of holding space for difference. Secondly, it's not able to dialogue across this difference. And thirdly, incapable of goodwill and to learn from your opponent even. Here I make a distinction between diversity and difference. We often talk about embracing diversity in our society. Now, diversity is a given, right? But often we embrace diversity when they look like us, think like us, feel like us, or agree with us. Now, Amartya Sen, the philosopher, calls this plural monoculturalism, but I call it monodiversity. Yeah? We need to move beyond diversity towards the concept of difference. Now, difference is not simply unlike us or different. It is far deeper than that. Difference is what makes us uncomfortable. It challenges us, our own views, our own thoughts, and our own positions. Now, how we deal with difference determines our trajectory towards harmony or disharmony. It is a kind of cognitive pluralism, the ability to entertain two or more opposing views and still function in a thoughtful manner. Why? Because we do not see an idea, a position, or even a policy in a very absolutist manner. And I'm directing this primarily towards policymakers. Therefore, we can be at ease with ambiguities, with possibilities, and even with critiques. Now, this is not a position of weakness. It can be a strength. Think of sometimes even we as activists, right? We feel a situation is so hopeless, but yet we still try our best to fix it. So we are able to entertain opposing things like that. But what is important to note is also is that not being able to accept difference has always been at the root of conflicts. And I know people may say that conflicts are okay, but I distinguish between conflicts and tensions. I think tensions are necessary, but I understood conflict differently. I see the opposite of difference as domination, as oppression, because the attitude is that our disagreement should not make us opponents. Yeah, but for some people, it makes us see the other as enemies. Now, in my work, I allow people to sit with difference and allow the encounter of difference to transform ourselves, not by ending everything in a consensus, but to come to at least a common concern. not fear. We talk about fear, but I'm interested how we can have common concerns. Now, whether we are on the left or right spectrum, whatever positions we may have on certain policies, that should not matter. But we can actually draw out what are the concerns that we have that we can start a conversation with. And dialogue is key. And with irreconcilable differences, we can continue to muddle through together. And when decisions need to be made, we adopt the most fair and most democratic way, but we also accept its provisionality. That means no policy should be seen as cast in stone, right? So that allows us to continuously engage ourselves, and this is the concept of agonistic pluralism that Chantal Mouffe, the political theorist, talks about. And I think our society needs to begin to embrace that a little bit more instead of just seeing things in binary need position. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Imran. Thank you for your sharing, which is very rich because it also talks about the way he approaches, the way he facilitates all those difficult conversations that deals with differences. I have two things that I've been thinking about here, which was also in response to what was being said there. Especially when we are talking about complex issues like religious issue, race issue, it's so embedded in that process, whereby then emotions will run high in it. And because it is not just because one believe in it, but there was a kind of a lived experience that make it real and raw. And how is that being considered in that kind of space? And that would actually also go into Sharon's discussion of that kind of political space that you want to look at. Does it also not just cognitive discussion, intellectual discourse, but where does that humanness of emotions come into the conversation? And of course, you did mention that there's this idea of deep listening, and we've been hearing our politicians talking about listening. So maybe if you have time, tell us what really deep listening is. Thank you. And now to you, Yenn.
Thank you. I can feel my heart beating faster and louder the closer it got to me. Okay. When I've been speaking about my work publicly the last few months, one question keeps coming up. How has the government responded to your work? The persistence of this question has helped me see that there is a dominant theory of change out there, and it is this: you can have impact only if you have the government's ear. This theory appears self-evident because we operate in a context of an interventionist and relatively effective government. The state's influence over multiple areas of life is strong enough that having the government's attention must mean a form of power. Yet, looking at the broad picture of scholarly influence on policy, I'm not convinced that this theory of change deserves to be accepted wholesale. We must at least acknowledge that to have the government's ear requires leaning into their framings, speaking their language, abiding by their terms of engagement. Do scholars have influence over the government, or does the government have influence over scholarship? As I note the ideological stasis in my areas of work, family, inequality, care and welfare regimes, I am less and less convinced that we can do our best scholarship or create the conditions to progress by operating only with this narrow theory of change. So, I've come to operate with a modified theory that banks more heavily on imagining not just the ear of the government, but also the ears of ordinary people. What do I mean by ordinary people? I mean a broad range of social actors who are less powerful and influential and whose lives are deeply shaped by state actions. This is a broad populace, the diverse and complex range of peoples who make up our society. Over the years, as I put writing out in the public realm and hear from readers, I see glimpses of this quiet force. There's a palpable hunger, an educated demand. This is an ever-sharpening public who takes in ideas and asks questions, who after individual acts of reading, turn to others to say, you must read this. And through that seemingly small act, creates ripples on the calm surface of a very viscous status quo. As individual droplets turn into bigger waves, I see the pressure they cause so that there are broader shifts in public discourse. And what they shift are the boundaries of what are speakable and thinkable. Over time, there is serious attention to the problems of poverty and inequality and the lived experiences of ordinary people, not because I have the government's ear, but because they do. If we as academics and artists operate with this modified theory of change, a theory of change that banks on ordinary people, where would we put our efforts and what might be the payoff? We could take a more proactive stance in getting our work out there. We might think of ourselves as activists for the cause of knowledge production and circulation, activists for imagination and connection. I don't mean that every scholar or artist should produce work that is widely accessible to a broad public, because I think that would make for a very narrow and dull scene. But I do mean that we should think of ourselves as contributors to a broader ecosystem. We are part of an ensemble, working for the cause of stretching the space for knowledge, creativity, and connection in society. I use the word activist because activism requires both individual belief and collective action, both values and practice. We must communicate, collaborate, coordinate. We must act with intention and solidarity. We should aspire to create works that don't just speak to individual career goals, but also to broader dreams for our society. As activists for knowledge, part of our labor must be oriented toward building a broad community of expression and learning, where there are both rich ideas for conceptions of a good life, as well as opportunity for continually asking questions. It is not that it's unimportant to have the government's ear, but I think if we fixate less on that and more on the broad public, we can do better scholarship, make better art, and also contribute to the work of change. Thank you.
Thank you, Yu Yenn. My response or my questions for you to what you have said about especially bringing in the ordinary audience. To how do we create this space? And I think over here, I keep thinking about this idea about how do we organize. Because in my own view, that over the last 50, 60 years, the power has dismantled a lot of our capabilities to organize and to mobilize. By having fear, by having structural limitations. So I think this is a question for actually all four of you who are also activists on your own. How do we then create that possibility? And every time when we talk about connection, how do we build that connection? It's always easier said than done. And how do we make them, again, we hate this word, sustainable? Yeah. And we go to conversation. Respond to any of those questions that I had just now. Thank you very much.
Maybe I can start.
Yes.
I think I mentioned in my speech that it can feel demoralizing, right? When you build up spaces and you lose spaces, and then you have to do the work of building it up all over again. But I always keep to heart like that amazing thing that Audre Lorde said, which is revolution is not a one-time event. It's in the acts that we do every day that build up. And so, you know, I think activism can look like very many different things. It can look like telling your friend, please read this book. It can look like not using AI to write. because language matters. And the better you are at your use of language, the harder it is for someone else to speak for you. So I think activism can look like many, many things in your life. And that's just, I guess, a very simple answer to how we keep organizing. It doesn't always have to look like one big time event.
I think just a simple thing, yeah. Sometimes as activists, we tend to be a little bit too idealistic. I mean, idealism is not a problem here. But in the sense that we want people to come into the space already sharing our own views and our own positions. I think that is not something that can expand and build a wider solidarity. We need to understand and feel the pulse of the people. In that sense, you have to be on the ground. You have to understand all the different permutations of the perspectives and thinking and find how you can meet them halfway. So it will not be helpful to, for example, okay, if you disagree with me, therefore you are on the other side, or you are not supportive of my cause. I think what we need to do is to understand what are the concerns that we can connect with, and then slowly through conversations and dialogue and building trust, people will be able to see what really you are fighting for and how what you are fighting for is also connected to the common good that they can relate with. I think we need to have some kind of strategy in that sense rather than just come from a standpoint, okay, I have this cause, you either join me or you don't. That will not build or widen that space for solidarity.
I think, I agree with what Imran just said about creating conditions are partly to do with creating trust and as well as creating space where there can be disagreement. Because a lot of my medium is in writing, I try to think about that in the writing process, where the audience I imagine when I come to the point in my writing when I'm thinking about my audience is an audience that needs to do the work when they come into the writing. So it's not a passive audience. I'm not trying to say, you have to buy my argument wholesale, take it or leave it, right? It's the intention I have when I'm writing is to sort of present a range of different questions for people to think about and try to make clear why I'm coming to the point I'm coming to. And then in some ways demand that they do the work of meeting me there as well, right? And I think that that's really important when we say that we want to create space as people who are creating things, that we must think of the audience as an active audience, not a passive audience, right? And that we must respect that part of the work belongs to them. The other thing I would say, partly because this has come up, I think both in this and the earlier panel, that a lot of the way our work is structured, of course, has to answer to some of the institutional KPIs and things like that. And so we are sometimes unable to do what we think is right, partly because of the constraints we feel in the structures of our work. And I think there is where we need to think about community also among the people who are creating things. We need to create, in some ways, sort of alternative modes of reward and affirmation for one another. If our institutions will not clap for us, we want to clap for each other.
Okay, creating space. I think there are unfortunately some spaces that are extremely tightly managed that should be more open. And frankly, can we do anything about it? No, because the management of those spaces is so much a fundamental part of how the government retains its dominance. And the spaces that I have in mind would, again, include the national media. So is there any hope that, for example, the editor of the Straits Times would be selected on a purely professional meritocratic basis? Zero. And that's the reality. And that's the reality, right? It would always be at least half, and I think that figure has gone up. It's now, I think, 80% a political decision. Yeah. What about heads of universities, deans of more sensitive schools? Again, nobody within the system believes that this is purely a meritocratic decision. These are gatekeepers chosen to manage the space, and they know the game, they know their job, right? So across society, you find critical spaces managed in this way. The net result of this system over decades of practicing it is, I don't think I'm exaggerating it. You can go back and think about whether I am exaggerating it. We have among the most homogeneous establishment elites in all developed countries. Yeah? Most normal countries, there's a wider range of views, even within the establishment. Let's not talk about activists like these troublemakers and so on, right? Just even within the establishment, there tends to be a wider range of views. Not in Singapore. In Singapore, I've been in many settings where if you close your eyes and there's someone from a university or the head of a media organization or even a business federation or someone at the top of the profession, they all sound like they're auditioning for government jobs. There is so little difference between the official government line and what these largely men and some women say, right? This is odd. It is extremely unusual, but we're very used to it. Can we do anything about it? Not much. That's the system. There may be some room at the edges for citizens to make their displeasure plain. If we think meritocracy is one of our the main pillars of our success, we need to probe it, ask why is it that in so many sectors, the standing committees and boards that are basically regulating and running Singapore do not, in fact, include the most knowledgeable experts in Singapore. Yeah? Don't take my word for it. My memory might be slightly off, and I may not be up to date, but I think I am correct when I say, for example, that the National Arts Council would not include, the board of the National Arts Council would not include the most respected and vocal artists in Singapore, the most independent-minded artists in Singapore. I think the same is true of the National Heritage Board. I'm going to put Kang Shua on the spot. Are you on the board of the National Heritage Board? Okay. And we've seen how brilliant he is. Why isn't he on the board of the National Heritage? I think of my friend Kevin Tan, who basically shepherded the Botanic Gardens into a World Heritage Site. And I asked him, has he ever been asked to sit on the National Heritage Board? Never. Right? Again and again, you go through these sectors and you find that we're not, in fact, making the best use of the people we have. Why? Because these individuals are too independent-minded. Because they know their stuff. They would not allow themselves to be gaslit by civil servants who've only been on that portfolio for a few years. These are people with a lifetime of experience. These are the Singaporeans we should want to be looking at these different sectors. If you do this kind of research and find that in a sector that you care about, the people who are, in fact, coming up with policy or guiding policy and drawing up regulations do not represent the best of us, make your voice heard. Complain to your MP. Write to the ministry and say, look, why is this board so weak? Why does it not include the best that our country has to offer? So that's the kind of thing that we could do, right, to enlarge the establishment spaces. As for non-establishment spaces, it will always be a struggle. But there, I think I would feed off what others have said. At least we can be there for one another. Don't allow ourselves to be told that these are just troublemakers. Blacklisting, which anyone in this position goes through, is partly a psychological trick. Right? It's not objective status. Blacklisting works when other decision makers in society agree that that person is on the blacklist. It would include decisions, for example, like in your various functions, right? Whether you're in charge of a club or an association or a small department or university and so on, you want to invite a speaker. Does it cross your mind, but oh wait, is it okay to invite that speaker? Isn't that person blacklisted? Right? Forget it, just invite the speaker because speaker has something interesting to say, right? Unfortunately, so many Singaporeans put themselves in that trap. Like I said, you have establishment figures wanting to audition for government jobs. Many Singaporeans in the decision-making positions also seem to want to act like government. Stop it, right? Just stop it. Let the government do their job. We as citizens can do our job.
Okay. Thank you. So you hear some of the sort of civil disobedience approach to actually challenge. No. But here I do want to ask a question because while we are imagining into the future, talking about imagination and alternatives, right? And here, we can't run away from the fact that we do have to engage the young people. And we are now actually going into a kind of a different, the generations are changing very quickly because of media and everything. I mean, you are all very experienced activists on the ground, and I would think that it's important to address this. How do we actually create a kind of alliances with the young people and be with them, in that process?
Am I the young person? Okay. I'm the youngest, I guess. I guess I'm going to answer your question a bit slant because I just think about it as a teacher per se, but I think I'm also thinking about your earlier question about teaching creativity versus imagination. Sorry, I'm still thinking about everything you said, so I can't really format a question. It's very difficult. Yeah, no, it's okay. No, thank you for that. But I think for me, sometimes we need to get out of the way, right? When we talk to young people, there's a lot of, sure, I teach undergrads and the Gen Z are not okay. Can we blame them? No. They went through formative years in COVID. They never went to a rave. Life is very hard for them. They don't know how to make eye contact. Help them, okay? But are they not thinking that's not true? I think we just need to look globally, right? At the student demonstrations happening in India, for example. And I've really been enjoying the content about the Gen Z-ness of the demonstration, right? They're standing next to police officers going detain me, daddy. It's hilarious. Hilarious. So I think it's not that they don't have it in them. I think we just need to meet them where they are and get out of the way. Sometimes I just think older people need to get out of the way. But in terms of creativity and imagination, I think creativity has been co-opted in a sense because I think even if you work as an artist and you've ever had to write a grant. Okay, that was a very funny response. But if you ever had to write, you have to prove why the project you're doing is useful, right? So you have to say things like, this many people will come, these are the outcomes I will achieve, and in 2 years, I think these are the things that we will change. So your art has to do something. It has to achieve something, right? And so that's why you always see art being paired with other things. It should be art with therapy, then it's care. It must be art with technology, then it's innovation. Art cannot just be art, right? Or when we teach, I think 10 years ago, creativity was the big buzzword in education. And it was we must teach creativity. And I just used to laugh because I'm how do you do that when kids have no time? You just won't leave them alone. People need to be left alone if they want to be creative, right? Imagine having a 35-minute timetable down to bedtime and someone's be creative. You can't. And then you have to prove that you've taught the creativity and show the outcome of the creativity, which you just can't. That's not what creativity is, right? It's a long, slow process. And I can tell you, as someone who has been an artist for 20 years, like the hours we spend sometimes just, I can't use the F word, but effing around, right, is also creativity. It's also like, it's just letting your brain loose and finding kind of inroads. And it cannot always lead to productivity. It's the opposite of it, right? It's allowing yourself to step off life and play, like just play, right? And we don't even let our children do that. Like my daughter is 5. Every time she wants to have a play date, like I get responses like, so sorry, like so-and-so has piano class, blah, 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 blah. And like kids just, we don't even let kids play. So I think it's wild that we talk about teaching creativity. But yeah, that's just my answer.
If I get your question correctly, it's about how do we engage with the government, right? Oh, young people. Okay, sorry. Completely different. I'm a recovering civil servant, so.
So the words come out, they automatically translate to government. I say something so that Imran has some time to change the direction. I've been thinking the last few days about this term cognitive liberation, which is a phrase that was coined by the sociologist Doug McAdam, writing about the civil rights movement. And he was talking about how this is one of the factors that's necessary for the movement to take off. And cognitive liberation is the idea that people have to recognize, A, that there is a problem, yeah, and B, that it's possible to change its course, and C, that it's possible to change its course through their own actions. And I think those of us who teach or work with young people, I think it's partly our duty to convey to them, or to give them a sense, or to produce the conditions in which they can experience or come to some form of cognitive liberation, right? Where they can see, yes, indeed, there is a problem, that it's possible to change, and that my actions can be part of that change. And I think some of it maybe links back to some of what Sherian said in his opening remarks, that part of that may be to convey historically how things have been, and how in this historical moment, although there are many things that look extremely bleak and seemingly hopeless, that in fact, there have also been huge gains, over a long historical period, right? And that's worth paying attention to. And that those of us who've maybe been in some of these circles for a long time too have seen shifts. Again, it's not, of course, a smooth arc of progress, but nonetheless, there are things that have been worth fighting for. And I think that is, those are things that are worth talking about and conveying, and worth saying to them explicitly, we believe in you, we are invested in you, and we think that we want you to be part of this community that we are trying to build.
Okay, I'm mindful of time, sorry. Maybe afterwards you can continue if you think that this is an important thing. I think what over here we've been hearing, there's a lot of this idea of how we actually hold a space and give a space. And if you do not, like when Pooja talked about, even you're not doing anything, you're actually holding a space and giving a space for something to generate and letting it happen. But we are in a society where every second becomes so important that time has always become a constraint rather than an enabler. I mean, there's a Korean philosopher who talks about contemplative lingering. Because I was responding to Kang Shua, who talks about see and look. And if you linger, what you do is that you allow time to have space, to have duration, to have vastness, to have possibility. And that then holds the space for us, for that imagination. But with that, thank you to this panel. And I want to give it to You Yenn to now run the next session, where all the speakers please come up, all the 4 speakers, and I will be seated. Thank you very much.
Thanks for staying with us. As you can tell, we are running a little bit behind, but I hope you'll stay till the end. So now we're targeting to wrap at 10:15. Is that right? Yeah, 10:15 thereabouts. And people have been sending questions through Clap. So I will take. I'm looking at it now, and I'm looking at the most upvoted questions. Okay, and give me a minute. Okay.
What? Oops. What's it called?
So thanks again to everyone who agreed to do this. I'm going to pose a couple of questions and maybe let a few people have a go at it, okay? The thing keeps moving. I'm sorry. I'm trying to read it, but then it keeps moving around because y'all are voting. Okay, let's see. Let's have this one. Okay, this question is, in light of the conversation being had, especially in the first panel, I suppose, about the false binary inherent in the presentation of trade-offs, what does Singaporean society lose when our government encourages silence and complicity regarding matters of global significance? For example, genocides occurring in Palestine, Sudan, or the Congo. Feel like I need to arrow somebody. Paul has built up. Thank you. Saving me from having to arrow Yuan.
Yeah, I mean, I think, this is related to Kopho's idea of us and those people. The constant mantra that we hear in Singapore is we are so special. We are, we're unique. We're an exceptional society. And the only place I've ever lived in outside of Singapore is actually America, where I did my postgraduate work. And it's incredibly identical in the abuse. They think that we're America, everybody else is, playing what they think is football, but they call soccer, but in a more realistic sense, we lose a huge amount by closing ourselves off from what is going on in the rest of the world. And I don't think this is always true. There's this heritage grant that has just come out, and I've been trying to find somebody to put out a grant to have a foreign interference tour of Singapore. Walking by the Singapore River, there's actually monuments to Ho Chi Minh, to Jose Rizal, to all these people who were revolutionaries who came to Singapore in the period between 1930 and 1950 to overthrow their governments. And I think that is something that Singapore has had and we have kind of lost, which is a bit sad.
Can I ask Sherian also to answer this question?
Can we just twist the question?
Of course.
And ask the opposite side of it. What does the government think it will lose by allowing such conversations? Something that intrigues me and intrigues a lot of friends I know outside of Singapore. They can't understand why we have such a fearful government. Right? We've been talking about fear among citizens. I'm more intrigued by the fear that the government has. I mean, in a way, it's rational for citizens of a very strong state to feel some fear. It would be probably not advised if you don't feel any fear. But what we can't figure out is why the government is so fearful. What does it fear by opening up to conversations? I mean, let's drill down to very concrete terms. What does it fear when 3 women walk along a pavement in Orchard Road to deliver a letter? Or we have friends who, a guy stands up with a sign, with a smiley face, and takes a selfie. That's frightening to the government. And so what is it? thinking about it rationally, the possible reasons are that, in fact, the government has no rational argument against these activists, and so it fears losing the argument. The reason that is normally given is that these are emotive issues, right? These are emotive, sensitive issues, and our society is vulnerable. The next time we as citizens hear that, I hope that enough Singaporeans would take that as a personal insult. Because what the government is really saying is that despite being one of the most educated, comfortable, wealthy societies on earth, we Singaporeans cannot be trusted with difficult conversations about things like Palestine, the death penalty, and migrant workers. That somehow we will lose our heads. We should feel insulted, and the government should feel less fearful.
Thank you.
Take another question and eventually make sure everybody gets a chance to say that. This question had a lot of upvotes, and it's for Imran specifically, because Imran, I think you were on the verge of saying something very important, and this question reflects that. As the recovering civil servant, what advice can you give activist-minded civil servants, not saying there are any here, who are currently working hard in service of the country, but find the lines blurred with working hard for working hard in service of the politician? Yeah, and maybe after Imran, I will ask Kok Ho also to answer this question.
That's a tough one. I mean, I was quite a troublemaker when I was in government service also. But I think context also matters, right? I think there's a lot more freedom, I would say, in my time. But I think a lot of the spaces are now closing up within the government service. A lot more surveillance and a lot more disciplining. So I don't really have an answer for that. But I think as civil servants, you do your best to serve the interests of the people. I think that should be at the top of the mind. It's not about serving up any party, it's about serving the people first, and therefore it takes some kind of courage to actually speak up. But of course, you have also a lot of considerations to make. For example, you have to think of various other factors, but don't be too harsh on yourselves also. And I think what matters is for the general public also to see the civil service not as something that is monolithic. I think especially for activists, yeah, it's not to draw the line between activists and government, but look for who are the allies within who share your cause, and don't make life harder for them. Because I mean, I've been a civil servant before, and sometimes, you know, it's very difficult to deal with certain elements within the civil service who are a bit more hawkish, and therefore some of the stunts of the activists outside makes some of our work even more difficult. So I think it's good to have that kind of dialogues and conversation. And I remember there was one instance where activists and civil servants came into a workshop to have a dialogue and to share their experiences in both sectors. I think those kind of conversations are very good. And I think maybe Civil Service College should actually organize something more like that, so that there can be real dialogues and discussion to build understanding between those who are advocates of certain causes and those who are actually working to improve the lives of Singaporeans from using government machineries. Yeah, I think that's at most I can say.
Thank you. Kok Ho?
Yeah, like Imran, I think it's really difficult. I think a few things will help. One is because civil service work can be so consuming, it's important to hold on to and protect your personhood, to remember that your thoughts and your opinions exist. I'm not kidding, it's easy to forget that. And to hold your ground for as long as you're in service. After leaving service, I was formerly in service, that's why you asked me to. answer this question. After leaving service, and then I've been in several very frosty meetings with civil servants who talk about my research, which I did not like, and then after, the most interesting things would always happen after I leave the meetings. Someone would run out after me to whisper words of support. Yeah, away from, out of earshot of their colleagues. Yeah, and I appreciate it. I mean, we laugh about it here, and not just junior civil servants. There was a DS who came out to offer words of encouragement, Deputy Secretary, second most senior civil servant in ministry, to whisper words of support, right? So I would say, I don't think that's healthy. So if there are young civil servants here, you're bright, you read books, right? You have thoughts, hold your ground. Just remember this, every time, we may think that the norms surrounding what should and should not be said in meetings are very strong, but those norms are shaped by your behavior in that moment, right? So every time you speak up and you challenge a decision that does not make sense, you're sending signals to your managers that we need to talk about this. You may think your signal is weak, but someone else may pick it up, and who knows, right? You won't change policy, so we must not have that illusion. But hold your ground and shape norms while you are in there. And like I said, doing what you can while you can. You don't have to be in service forever, right? Having been in civil service is really good for your CV. There are many opportunities out there. So when it's time to move on, move on. But while you're in there, hold on to your personhood. That matters.
Thank you, Kok Ho. I should add, there was another question that I feel like Kok Ho already answered, which is there an argument for working within the system until you are in a position to effect the change you want to see? So I think in his last bit of his comments, he sort of addressed that. And Nien also has some insights to shed on this.
Oh no, I just have, on a completely unrelated note, I'm not suggesting anything, but artist activist Lu Zihan just finished his dissertation, and in one of the dissertation chapters he talks about this concept called camouflage. And I'm not suggesting anything, but maybe that could be useful reading.
Just saying camouflage, but not really saying camouflage. I'm sure.
Agree that the civil service, we tend to think it's very homogeneous. They are not. Yeah, actually, I work with very excellent civil servants. And I think that every one of us as citizens has to help the civil service. Right? So for example, official public feedback channel. Don't just sign petition, because the name petition doesn't really count. Do official feedback. I think that will help civil servants to gather feedbacks and perhaps change policy. So this is on a short term and mid term. What a long term? Long term, in my line of work, I think we have to really challenge the sacred cows. For example, we're always told that Singapore is land scarce, and indeed we are land scarce, right? And therefore, in my case, heritage must give way to development. So they build up a binary, right? Preserve or development. And we have to go for development because we cannot stifle our economic growth. So that was the story. But that is a false assumption, I think so. So we have to revisit this sacred cow. So for example, shouldn't we have a discussion that, should we just keep parts of Singapore as it is? Freeze redevelopment. If they're building there, just continue to use them. But intensify certain parts of Singapore, right? Intensify. We have not reached the kind of density, for example, in Hong Kong Island. Maybe we should go there. Maybe we should not. But we should have a conversation, revisit certain assumptions. To me, as an architect, I think space is unlimited because it's about money. Do you have the technology or the money to build? Land is scarce, yes, but space is not scarce. So that's what I want to say.
Thank you. There seem to be a lot of civil servants on the Wu clip. I hope that responses have actually covered many of these questions. I'm sorry that I'm unable to read all of them. There are a couple of questions that relate to how questions. People want to hear a little bit more about how you think some of these changes we've talked about that are necessary can come about. So I wonder if I could invite Pooja to say something and maybe Yenn to say something again about the how and how you think about the how. How we should think about the how question.
My God, we have all not had dinner. That is a very abstract question.
Shall I get a little bit more? Okay.
Yeah.
Let me see. All right. So maybe this maybe concretizes it a little bit. How to implement some of the suggestions, because power is not given; it has to be taken. You know, there are no incentives for the powerful to change the status quo. So, what do we do?
I mean, I think it's been said a couple of different ways in the conversations that it's easy, whether you work in the civil service, which I used to as well, or like you're a young person in this country, like so many of my students say, what's the point? Like no matter how hard we work, we're never going to be even able to afford a flat. What's the point, right? And I think it's easy to feel that way. But the question you had was that power isn't given. It has to be taken.
Power won't seed itself, I suppose, is what they meant.
But I mean, I think you must understand that your personhood is yours. Your everyday actions are yours. I think what you said really spoke to me about, you know, sometimes we, as Singaporeans, we tend to fall into the mentality that, you know, it's just futile. So, and it's exhausting, I agree, like, it's exhausting, right? And so you're like, what difference is this going to make? And sure, some days we all need to take that route, but I think sometimes you'll be surprised at who's listening when you do say something, right? Even in your state of fatigue. Or if you are a young person, I think I was so invested in the last elections. I'll go to class and I'm like, guys, you, and they're like, nah, there's no point. And I was just like, how can you not? Like, you are about to inherit, and I would just kind of force those conversations about their feelings about things or how it would affect their daily lives. But I think we just have to not forget when we think about the how that, like, it doesn't, as you said, like, you're not going to be able to change policy, right? But everyday actions accumulate to energies that shift directions. So never think that the smallest of actions don't matter. Yeah.
Thank you. Yenn? And if I could just also add a few more, because there were a couple more questions about part of the how is also how do you bring more people who are maybe a little bit more apathetic or who don't have an opportunity to come to, for example, events like this. How do you bring people in?
I mean, in the realm of storytelling, specifically for what I was talking about just now, is the realm of digital media, which is extremely powerful. And I think there are many storytellers in this room, and a lot of storytellers require, support and funding, and they get, so they need to be legible, right? So they need to stick to a certain formula. I think there are also many storytellers who have kind of appropriated these funds and stuck to a formula, but just added a little twist or pushed a little boundary. You can add a little bit more context. You can end on a not so positive note. You can just, refer to structural and systemic problems. So, for example, when you talk about heritage, the displacement of Dakota, the residents, right, to Kasia Crescent. I think a group called Rangan Media, led by Jeremy Ho and Tsai Ing-jo, they created this project called Between Two Homes. And I think that project, if you want to look it up, a lot of it looks very familiar, very sentimental, but at the same time, it does shift the frame a little bit to look at something that is maybe, this is maybe not a happy ending that we should accept. There are certain bureaucratic kind of hoops that these people had to go through. And so they are referring to systems, they're referring to structure. And I think that is the main note about the how in digital media that I think we need to push towards. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to add to this question of how, Imran?
sometimes the how, it's too cerebral, right? Because people have certain opinions on certain issues and policies, and I think what matters is how it's going to touch their hearts in order for them to make that transformation and see the point of the other person. And that requires not just about debating policies. It requires about understanding lived realities. It requires about sharing personal narratives and how some of these things that are up there actually impact lives on the ground. And I do this primarily through my workshops, for example. It's just as simple as, in a scale of 1 to 10, where do you think the state of racial harmony in Singapore is? And everyone will just rank themselves based on their own personal experience. And then we just make them share. And then while sharing, they also are forced to listen to the sharings by other people and how other people view it through their own personal experience. And this kind of sharing of personal narratives is actually quite powerful because it allows them to then reflect on their experience in the light of what they've heard from other people's experience. And then at the end of it, you ask them to now see whether you want to change their ratings. And most people would change, And of course, in this kind of space, we tell them there's no right and wrong in that sense. What matters is how you see your positionality and how you see your own experience impact how you view how you develop your own perspectives. And through that kind of simple exercise, you actually see people moving, like those who give very low ratings begin to see actually, there are some things that we have gotten right, and then they move up a bit. Those who give very high rating, there are people who give like 9 or 8 or 9 for Singapore, and then when they hear some of these stories of racism, of microaggressions, of how certain things have impacted lives of others that they were not aware of, then they begin to see, oh, maybe I bring it down a bit 6 because I think there's a lot more work to be done. I think that kind of mechanisms and the how is very important, rather than just having a discussion or a debate over whether there's racism in Singapore or not, which I find to be too cerebral and it doesn't really change minds.
If I could add, I think sometimes at these events, and I see it from some of the questions too, there's always this sense that, oh, I am here, but other people are not here. Or I'm here, but it's hard to convince some of the other people in my circles to come to events like this. And I think we shouldn't underestimate that it's amazing you're here. It's a wonderful thing that we've been able to gather in these spaces. And every time we gather, that's considering all the structural constraints, we should celebrate that, and we should not always think of this as a but it's a lack, always see it from the perspective of a lack. Because I do think, over the years as I've been talking about my work in public, that actually every time I do an event, I see lots of new faces. I have lots of people come and tell me that this is the first time they're at a book launch or the first time that they're at a seminar. And I think that that's important, right? Of course, we have to continue building that momentum, but it's valuable and it's worthy, and we are playing the long game, and there's no need to always be thinking about our lacks versus what we do have that we're working with. Does anybody else want to make a point? Yeah.
I think we've heard enough from our moderator. So can I pose one question here for you that actually asks you to elaborate, which is, there's a question here that says, do you think solidarity is still possible in Singapore? Can I ask you, Yu Yenn, what do you understand by solidarity? Have there been encouraging examples of solidarity that you've seen before that you'd like to see more of?
Yeah. No, I definitely think that solidarity is possible. I think that there is a lot of, part of what I try to show in this book is that talking to people, I get this strong sense that people do want to do what is right. And the unease comes from this inability or this sense that it's difficult to do things that they feel are right? And part of that is about thinking beyond one's self-interest, right? So I think that does signal that, we are social creatures. We do need more than simply sort of fulfilling our narrow individual material needs. We also have needs to be part of this collective, right? I think that this has to happen in many different spaces. So one of the points I was trying to make earlier, that we need to think about it, both sometimes in terms of how do we engage the audience, but also sometimes in terms of how do we work with one another. Yeah, that's really important. We have to be working, I think, at these different levels, right? Where it's different concentric circles, and sometimes we overlap and sometimes we don't, and we're trying to grow that space and expand that space. It doesn't mean, solidarity does not mean we are all in agreement with each other. In fact, I think that would be very unhealthy, right? But instead, what we're trying to expand is for space of disagreement, space of genuine embracing of and appreciation for difference. Pass, Ken, okay. So in the last 5 minutes, what I would like to do is to invite all the speakers each to give one closing, parting sentence, yeah? So that everybody has something to take away with them, and then I will close. Does anybody want to start, or should I just go? Nobody's making eye contact now. Paul!
Yeah, I mean, I think I said it before, and I'll say it again, is that every single one of us is different, and we've got something that's a part of the whole. And it's a cliche, but in reality, when you talk about the how, I've just been so amazed by so many different ways that Singaporeans make their voices heard. And it's partly because of the need to camouflage. That perhaps you have to strip away the outside or look and try to stare very hard, look, listen, and figure it out. But I'm really encouraged. I go to different events. I go to my wife always says it's Saturday afternoon. What kind of activist event are you going for? It's amazing. Every Saturday there's something on. So even on Friday night. So that is really encouraging. So that's all I have to say.
And I have to say, Paul is the most hardworking attendee of these events because he's the person I run into the most at events. Ho?
Yeah, Sharon mentioned earlier, some of these spaces where we want to do this work can feel very tightly managed. So, if we are a little bit older and we are already in the room, it's important to remember to just keep the door open and help other people in, right? Especially younger people. And I know not to put too much burden on you, but there are so many young people in the audience, I have to say this. I mean, this bunch will hang around here for a bit more, but eventually this work will be done by you. So, I thank you in advance for doing this work.
You can't go away now. Sharon?
One thing I hope that Singaporeans will think more about is our kind of judgmental attitude to Singaporeans who are trying. And because it's difficult for activists, and because they're shut out of the more rational spaces like the op-ed pages and so on, they of course have to use unconventional methods to get attention. And many Singaporeans are judgmental of those unconventional methods. So I would just urge people to be more patient, including with activists who sometimes make mistakes, as all people do. Think of the message that they're trying to sell. Think critically about it, and not necessarily judge them for the fact that they don't all sound like MPs in Parliament. It's not their job to sound like MPs in Parliament. So I think more tolerance, more listening, more deep listening, which we didn't talk more about, would I think help all of us.
Thank you. Lynn?
Thank you. Mine's very short. I will draw from Teo You Yenn's words in This Is What Inequality Looks Like, which deeply, deeply influenced my work in my PhD. So step one is to disrupt our narratives, and I think today it shows that we're very hungry for step two. Yeah.
Thank you.
You Yenn did warn us that she wanted us to do a closing, a one sentence closing. I'll try to be a good student. I'll try to reflect on what I want to say on closing. I said that I think that as an individual, our collective imagination is sometimes small and stubborn, right? But a city that's confident enough to leave the ugly, the awkward, the unfinished, the inconvenience things, and that's where I think life will leave its mark. Thank you.
One beautiful sentence. Pooja.
I just want to say, I felt like a real imposter the whole evening. You too? Yeah, okay, cool. Okay, we all feel like only the women are like, we did, no one else is good. Okay, but it's just, just because the word...
We are too slow to catch on.
Oh, I see, okay.
Just because the word activist has been said so often, which I do not see myself primarily as an activist. If the writing does some activism, sure, but I see myself primarily as a writer, and I think the only thing I want is that I just want everyone to commit to reading a poem this week. And Ethos and Afterimage are selling books outside. Thank you.
So you have no excuse. Imran?
Three things, very short one. Firstly, I think take care of yourselves. Yeah, so that's very important. It's a long journey, so if you are in the work of advocacy, please learn to take care of yourself also. Secondly, take care of others. Check in on your friends, sometimes that's how we build solidarity actually. So even, like when Sharon did not get his tenure, we wrote, we put our names down, that's how we actually show solidarity, even though we know it's not going to work, but still. Yeah. And I think last but not least is, I think we need to learn how to laugh also. That's where we find joy. So sometimes, we have to break this stereotype of the angry activist, always out to, be angry, right? But I think there's a lot of joy in the work that we do, and I think one way is for us to learn how to laugh, including laughing at ourselves for our failures, because that allows us to grow in that process. Yeah.
Thank you, Imran. So, this is the kind of event where, as part of the price of your ticket, you get to enjoy yourself here, and you have things to take away. So, eat in and tapao, okay? So, here are things I hope you will continue to mull over as you leave. The core idea embedded in the notion of states of unease is that in Singapore today, there are gaps between ideals and realities. These matter because they cost us. And the gaps, although palpable as experiences, are somehow hard to perceive. The work of scholars and artists are to poke at, to uncover, to interrogate the gaps. And the work of the broader public is to take these articulations, further complicate them, and broaden their visibility in the collective consciousness. This labor is not one-off. It cannot be done in isolation. Using your education to broaden your education, showing up, pitching in, being activated and staying energized. We have to do this over and over again, and we have to do this collectively. A vibrant knowledge ecosystem and community is a dream we can only bring into fruition if we behave like it is already a reality. Thank you to each of our remarkable speakers, Kok Ho, Kang Shua, Paul, Nien, Sherian, Pooja, Imran, and to our marvelous moderators, Anthea and Hing Luan, for such an enriching evening, for educating us and giving us a sense of possibility, get to eat in, get to take home. Yeah. Thank you to the wonderful Ethos books, for spearheading this event, inviting Academia SG's collaboration, and from me, a personal thank you to my amazing Academia SG co-editors who always make working together full of laughs. Thank you to the many people who've put in time, effort, and varied talents into running this event, the entire staff at Ethos Books, our assistants at Academia SG, and many volunteers who've stepped in to help. And thank you to all of you here tonight for snapping up tickets or tuning in to the live stream, for showing up and being part of the dream that we're pretending is already a reality. Until we next meet, keep well, get activated, stay dreamy. Thank you. Now let me pass the mic over to Cass from Ethos Books to close the event.
Hi everyone. Okay, well, I see people are already leaving. That's actually what I was going to talk about, so great. I just wanted to say that we are incredibly grateful for everyone who has taken the time to attend tonight, both from Ethos Books and Academia SG, to see the overwhelming response and eagerness to participate. I'm just going to whisk through some slides really quick because we actually only have the place for about 10 more minutes. Okay, so if you would like to keep abreast of the latest scholarly work on Singapore, do sign up for Academia SG's free email newsletter. It's the most comprehensive source for news about upcoming events and new publications. After this, please, we seek your help to make your way out of the premises in a safe and orderly way. Unfortunately, due to the lack of time, books will not be sold, but you can visit Ethos Books' web store, as well as After Images' web store. Their books are sold on their website as well. And tomorrow, Ethos Books will also be bringing titles that were available tonight, as well as other titles, to the Singapore Independent Media Fair, taking place at Orchard Cine Leisure at 1 p.m. to 7 p.m. It is free to visit the fair and its booths, but should you like to attend the panels, which have a great lineup, including Cherian speaking at one of the panels, you can use this QR code over here to check out the tickets. And finally, though we will have to leave after this quite promptly, we understand you might like to continue the conversations started tonight, and you can do so at the nearby Harry's and Jimmy's with discounts, yes. So simply let staff know that you are a States of Unease attendee. And on your way out, there's actually quite a lot of sponsored drinks that are left over, in particular beer. So please collect them from the registration table. And if you have the good fortune of looking younger than 18, we might have to do a quick age check. Yeah, so please help to clear the beer, and please feel free to move your conversations to the bars nearby with discounts. Finally, have a good evening, and wishing you all a very pleasant weekend.